Hello, everyone, and welcome to our horse talk today. We're going to be talking with wildlife ecologist Craig Downer. Um, Everyone is muted, just so that you know. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. And our hope today is that you get some answers to questions you may have that will help you with your comments for the draft environmental assessment that was released in September. And since not many of us are scientists or ecologists or have the scientific knowledge that we need to write substantive comments in the scientific way, we invited Craig here to talk to us. So I don't know, Craig, if you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, because you've got quite a history and quite the resume.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I consider that I'm pretty true to the pure original intent of the wild horse and burro movement. Me and my family, that's my folks and brother and sister, we were friends of Wild Horse Annie, and we worked closely with her during the establishment of the Wild Free Roaming Horse and Burros Act. And I worked with her for a number of years when I was earning my degrees there in biology with specialization in wildlife ecology, and she would assign me to go out and check on the herds and to make presentations at schools or public meetings, and also to interview reporters. I was on the program Nevada Newsmakers a number of times, and I noticed I was glad to see that Milton Fry, uh,
Yeah.
who was the Nevada lead wild horse and burro lead official. I did a co-program with him on Nevada Newsmakers, and I was glad to see how positive he was in 1977 toward the Theodore Roosevelt National Park wild horses. He really gave them a thumbs up and said they were doing great and that they needed to be more, and that he didn't say all these derogatory things. So yeah, I have quite a history, and I wrote my first book was Wild Horses: Living Symbols of Freedom, and that was had the introduction by or the preface by Wild Horse Annie. And then later I wrote The Wild Horse Conspiracy, which is currently read by quite a few people, and it's been used in a lot of cases. And I've done a number of articles, including scientific articles on the wild horse and burros. But in general, I'm a specialist in the order that includes the horse family and the tapir family and the rhino family, and that's called the Perissodactyl. And a lot of my work has been down in South America in the northern Andes, where I've done pioneer work for the endangered Andean or mountain tapir, and I'm a member of the IUCN Species Survival Commission. So my specialization is the Perissodactyl order, and all these animals, whether they're rhino tapirs or equids, they're all really important to ecosystems where they belong, and they really complement the cloven hoofed ruminants in many ways. I've written a lot about that. So I think they're gaining respect in a lot of areas, like over in Europe. Rewild Europe is recognizing that they're very valuable, and in here in North America, South America, all over the world, they're coming to recognize these animals as being natural gardeners who build soil, healthy soil, disperse seeds of plants, and reduce dry flammable vegetation, prevent catastrophic wildfire, and as a little study I did, conclusive that they're superior carbon sequesters. They sequester and great grassland builders. So there's just so much to be said for them. And I do offer a PowerPoint, a professional PowerPoint, either on the wild horse and burros of America or on the perissodactyls of the world. And I welcome opportunities to come and present my PowerPoint.
Well, thank you. And thank you for being here today. I appreciate it. Like I said, we found a lot of holes in the draft environmental assessment, and I'm sure that that's nothing new for you because it's um one thing that I want to make clear because people do get confused. This is the National Park Service. This isn't the BLM, but both agencies are under the Department of the Interior. And I think a lot of what we're seeing at the Park Service, um, it's very clear that they're taking they're taking a page out of a BLM handbook. Um, I've heard that this EA looks similar to, a lot of similar excuses and a lot of similar things that you would find in there. One of the big things is that everything goes back to the purpose and need statement of their draft environmental assessment. And so what they're saying here is the purpose of the proposed action is to address livestock, because that's what they've decided that horses are in the park. And that's something that we've told people they need to argue because we can't find where they properly change that classification. And we've asked for paperwork and we've asked for documentation and we're not getting it. So that's just something that they've decided without consulting the public. So within the park under relevant laws, regulations, policies, and management priorities, including the conservation of native species and natural prairie ecosystem functions. So one of the arguments, and I know it's a big argument and it's not something that I think that we have to get into here, but there's been a lot of research lately talking about horses that horses are more native than we think, or that they didn't die out like we thought they did, or they've got a lot more history. But I think that the native argument, um, because I don't know that there is really a definitive response to what is native anymore, right? Um, but when the bison, the pronghorn, the elk, the and the bighorn sheep were all reintroduced to this park, but the horses were fenced in. That's an aspect of native. Is that something that you think is worth arguing?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, the horses and the whole genus and Equus and the horse family is one of the most ancient and long-standing and deeply rooted evolutionarily groups in North America. And to make that statement just strikes me as being so incredibly um, ignorant or deliberately overlooking uh, a fair view of the life community in North America rather than an extremely narrow-minded and reduced view, and to overlook all the how they complement the other species, and also about the very recent origin of those species that they promote, which are mainly big game species. And even the bison is a much more recent arrival in North America, coming from Eurasia, than the horse, which is deeply rooted here. I mean, it's just a fabulous history, and I've studied a lot of paleontology. I found it just fascinating. And many of the fossils are there in the Dakotas, like in the Badlands. And there in Idaho, they have the Hagerman horse national monument, and you can go there and see the complete history of the horse family, genus, and species. And I hope they didn't take that down. But when I was there, a few years ago, they definitely said that the modern horse, Equus caballus, was a native, deeply rooted native going back a few million years here in North America. I think a lot of it boils down to the established interests and just kind of a closed-minded, knee-jerk attitude. And I just wanted to make the point, just because the Wild Free Roaming Horse and Burros Act did not include the National Park Service, it did not say that nothing in their policy says they have to uh, ignore the wild horses or not include them as part of uh, their species that they protect.
Thank you.
And section 4 and 6 of the Wild Free Roaming Horse and Burros Act actually encourages cooperative agreements with adjacent landowners and agency government agencies, local, state, or national, in order to achieve thriving, well adapted herds on the public lands. And so, a lot of it is just the attitudes of the people, and really getting with what was the true spirit and intent of the law.
Right. And that's something that we brought up too, because the park is in the town of Medora. The park is not talking to the town of Medora. The state of North Dakota has offered any resources we have to keep the horses there, and they just are staying their course and continuing on, which is unfortunate because there is none of this working with the local communities, the local government, any of that happening. And it's really, it's
Yeah.
a big miss on the part of the park. I think, they've got
Yeah.
the whole state, at their feet, ready to do whatever we can do to keep these horses here, and they're still saying, nope, gotta go.
No,
So,
no, I think it's being they're being defiant and
mhm,
really out of line by ignoring the public support of these horses, including the local support. That
right,
to me just seems so defiant and so disrespectful.
right.
Disrespectful.
The other thing I want to ask you is that the other part of the purpose and need statement talks about restoring the native prairie ecosystem, the preservation of the native prairie ecosystem, and they don't define that. Um, so we tried to ask in their civic engagement meetings, any questions they keep telling us we can make as part of our comment letter, but those questions aren't going to get answered until they come back with a FONSI, which isn't going to help. But um, a native prairie ecosystem in a park that was set up with historical undertones, like the whole purpose of this park is historical and to commemorate a time when Theodore Roosevelt was here, his ranching and conservation legacy. So is that a valid argument, do you think, that that native prairie ecosystem then should be something that Theodore Roosevelt experienced when he was here, and we know there were horses here?
Yeah, I mean, the prairie seems, from all my readings and study and observations, it's really an ideal uh, community type for the wild horse. It allows them their free roaming, semi-nomadic nature, natural rest rotation. Horses are very good at maintaining grasslands, combating the overtake of shrubs and trees, and helping build deep root systems, because their droppings help build very rich and deep nutrient-rich soils that also absorb and retain water to a greater degree. So I just think that's a very ignorant and twisted statement to exclude the horses here, and also to ignore how they balance or complement the cloven-hoofed rumen fermenting digestive herbivores. They complement them. There's no doubt about it. There's been any truly objective studies that have been done show, whether it's with antelope or deer or elk, show that they complement these animals rather than work against them. I think the main problem is that we have some people that are really stuck on old traditions. They're like back in the 1800s. They still have that mentality of what's valuable, and they really need to break out of their old molds and open their eyes and to all the naturally living horses have to offer. They're really, as most people who are at all all fair, recognize what highly evolved and extraordinary animals they are, and how much they have to contribute naturally too, not just as domesticated animals, but naturally. And I just wrote a article that was published. I actually wrote a much longer article, about 6,000 words, but I don't know if you read that. It was called about the establishment disinformation, stepping up discrediting campaign against the wild horse and burros. So I'm starting to get some good compliments from that, including from professors and fellow wildlife ecologists. So I just think we just have to stick by our guns, because we have the greater truth and justice on our side.
So can I go through a couple things that they've said in their report, and then maybe you can give us some thoughts and ideas, and some of it you've covered already, but these are just some points that they brought out. So they're saying that the horses are a non-native species that trample vegetation and compact soil, causing adverse effects on habitat composition and quality.
Boy, that is so twisted. Well, I will say one thing. Now, if horses are set up through various what I call squeeze plays to be to have their natural lifestyles thwarted, any animal, whether it's a deer or elk or cow or sheep, whatever, if they're not allowed to fill their natural place in the ecosystem, then things become unnatural. But when the horse is allowed to have a sufficiently broad area to roam in and to naturally adapt and balance with all the other species, what they say is just simply not true. It's a very prejudiced view, and it ignores so many aspects of the biology and ecology of the horses. Now, one thing is they have these round, blunted hooves, which are quite different from the sharp, cloven hoofs of the of the other artiodactyl, or the deer, common deer, elk, moose, cows, bison, and they don't cut as deeply into, say, moist riparian or meadow habitat, streamside habitat, and also their broad-ranging lifestyle, which is very mobile. You watch them, countless studies have shown they don't linger on one place, they keep moving. And when they make large displacement, they follow trails. They don't just go like a big mass, trampling everything. But now the point about when they open up thickets, because they're a more powerful animal, that actually benefits many smaller, weaker animals, including deer and antelope, helps them access. And they actually are very, we had a presentation on this at the Save Our Wild Horse conference about how they promote grasslands, meadows, and grassland
Right.
horses. And so that would be a benefit to the other native herbivores, and which they should also be considered. It's only because of a very narrow-minded view. And as I say, it's kind of like blind tradition, and not being able to break out of that kind of blinder that prevents them. And I think a lot of this is due to social pressure from people who have traditionally negative toward the wild horses. But that can be overcome. And I think we can do it just by sticking by our guns. I mean, we have the greater truth and justice on our side, greater justification, and not be drowned out by the crowd, so to speak, or by the so-called in crowd, but have the courage of our convictions and keep speaking up. And I would hope that if they persist in this extremely closed-minded and negative uh, decision, they should be sued. You know, all avenues of appeal should be exercised, even to legal suit for negligence of duty.
We plan on it. We plan on taking the fight as far as we have to, that's for sure.
Wonderful, wonderful.
They also said in this report that the horses also compete with native wildlife species such as elk, deer, bighorn sheep, and bison for food and water resources. How
No,
much?
as I was saying, they actually complement those species.
Right.
They complement them. And you just have to let nature reach its balance, its natural balance. When people come in and arbitrarily try to define what the proportions are, but not let nature show them what would be the just proportion, see, they're jumping to conclusions. They have a negative view of the naturally living horse, and they see it in a negative light. What they have to learn is to observe how these different type of herbivores actually help the cloven-hoofed ruminants, and they enhance the ecosystem. They, as the law said, they contribute to the richness of species in our nation, and the integrity of the ecosystem. You know, it's right in the main clauses of the Wild Free Roaming Horse and Burros Act. And as I repeat, there's nothing in that any of these acts that say that the National Park Service has to have these negative uh, views. In none of the laws say that. These are just policies they have adopted in their regulations. And I think a lot of this is these people have gotten into a kind of a paralyzed situation where people are afraid to break out of the mold, the negative mold. And I write about that in my book. Some of the early superintendents just decided suddenly to take a totally draconian and negative view toward all the wild horses and burros, just sort of knee-jerk reaction. And that's continued for decades. But hey, things change, you know, people learn new things, they get more enlightened, and that's, you know, we must stand by them, because they're wonderful presences here on the earth, and they deserve to be respected and to have beautiful, free life in nature. And that was the whole spirit and intent of the, you know, of all our movement, all of Wild Horse and Fur movement.
So they talked about climate change in here a lot and said climate change conditions may further limit resources, making competition more severe and limiting the resource capacity for native species in the park. So what do you have to say about climate change and wild horses, I guess, and their
Well,
impact?
uh, as my study has shown, they are a positive asset in combating global warming, and they are superior carbon sequesters, and that has to do with the fact that they don't as thoroughly digest what they ingest. So consequently, their droppings have more intact molecules and create more substantive humus content of the soils, which is more nutrient rich and moisture retentive. Uh, so they're superior carbon sequesters. They create deeper, richer soils, and basically many. Oh yeah, they're seeding. They're seeding of so many more seeds pass through intact of a greater variety of plants, including so many of the native plants, the bunch grasses. And another thing is that they can tolerate having to eat drier, coarser vegetation than many of the ruminants because they don't have to as thoroughly digest those coarse dry blades of grass or whatever, or leaves. Uh, and But they can turn them into rich soils, and they could greatly reduce what's called the fuel load, or the dry flammable vegetation, which leads to these catastrophic wildfires. So I just see nothing but win-win for horse, objectively, being objective. But and I think we can win this battle by being really self-confident and assured and well grounded, and not being thrown off by people who get altered in their temperament and lash out and come out with these bald-faced statements. That we just have to kind of humor these people, sort of like children that need to be instructed, but not in a hostile way.
No, that makes sense. So to what you were saying, they actually did put this in the draft EA. Horses specifically are known to ingest noxious weeds and spread viable seeds throughout manure. So they're saying that what they're seeding are going to be weeds, and so that's also hurting the environment.
So they're taking, yeah, weed is a pretty prejudiced statement itself. So they talk about the plants they've targeted as being undesirable, and nothing about the native plants which they see.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, they have to live, they're out there, and because of the disturbances, many of these are, so-called, they're not as recent in North America as other species, but that can change. And a weed, so-called weed, can be some of the most amazing plants that in the world, because they're able to take practically soil denuded areas, usually because of what people have done, and restore the soils. And if you let natural succession take place, often what happens is the natives come back in after these so-called hardy pioneer so-called weeds have gone in, just trampled, baked, denuded topsoil areas, and restored the soils to some degree. So it's really key to get this concept of the natural succession and what it takes to restore ecosystems in a balanced situation. And I stand by this. The naturally living horses are wonderful gardeners of the prairie ecosystem. And if they were so destructive, why were there millions of them running alongside the buffalo and the pronghorn antelope and the elk and the deer and the moose and all the other? Why they weren't destroying habitat for all those centuries? Everything was great. And I know I've met even old ranchers that will say, hey, everything was great. Like when I did my study in the Apache Pitgraves National Forest, there was one old rancher, who said, hey, the horses were here and they were alongside the deer and the other cloven hoof grazers, and he said it was never been better. And then he had a modest number of cattle too, of course. And he admitted that. He said things have never been better, and the horses were fine. So these are honest people that have not been influenced by this kind of anti-wild horse knee-jerk attitude, that has crept into so many of our bureaucracies or our organizations to do with the public land. So I really think we can change this, but the general public, like what you're doing, Chris, is really the answer. People have to become really vitally engaged
Right.
and take a stand and not be easily intimidated or discouraged, but stick by your guns and keep learning, keep perfecting, and be honest, well-intentioned, good-willed people, and don't go off the deep end, so to speak. Take the long-term view, and then we can win.
Well, let me ask you this because we talked about this before in the last talk that we had. Um because what you're saying too makes sense. So this park has existed, I mean, long before the park was even fenced. The horses were here. We know that since the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s, when they started reintroducing other species, all of these species have existed together. They've coexisted, and it seems like they're all doing great. Like you said, there would be signs that we would see if the ecosystem was failing because of the horses or bison, or because they couldn't get along. But part of, I think, what fascinates me as I've been learning more about this, and this has been like I feel like it's been a very fast and hard learning experience for me, for all of it, not just like the NEPA process, but what's going on in the environment. But one thing that fascinates me that we don't talk about enough is the park itself as its own ecosystem. And can you talk about that a little bit, how the park does what it needs to make sure that 200 horses, the 400, 500 bison, the elk, the deer, the prairie dogs, that everything there can exist and gets what it needs from it, from that ecosystem.
Yeah, one of the primary mandates is to have a thriving, naturally balanced ecosystem of the National Park Service. Much of their mandate is along those lines, and then to incorporate human recreation, mainly letting people come and appreciate it, but not overly impacted. So I think it would be an ideal situation where horses could show that they do belong and they do complement the other species. I think there's a lot of problem with these fences that are established along the boundaries and restrict the natural movements, because obviously these animals are just following their natural wisdom about how to survive, and the artificial boundaries of that people impose on the land uh, you know is something that it's not natural. So if they set up these cooperative agreements with the adjacent landowners to allow a natural self-stabilizing process and among the different species and the horse population, and I think it would really show that the horses are very beneficial and enhance the ecosystem. That should be a goal of theirs rather than targeting horses as misfit.
I asked you this in our last talk. What would be the impact on the park itself as an ecosystem if they are successful and remove 200 horses from the park?
I think it would have a very negative impact. I think it would increase the danger of fire. It would impoverish the soils. It would increase the seed dispersal of many species that are valuable, including native species. And it would also be a black eye because of the natural beauty of the horses and fascination with their behavior that so many people recognize, and that so many people, elements of society would feel betrayed or not listened to, disrespected, and then that would uh, result in a very negative consequence for the Theodore Roosevelt National Park, and people would see them as having been petty-minded and close-minded and disrespectful to the horses and to the people who appreciate horses.
I think the last time we talked, you used the metaphor and said, like for the park itself, it would be like the park would like have a literal heart attack, like that ecosystem.
Yeah, yeah, it would. And I've seen many areas where they've gutted the herds through these draconian stream roundups, taking out three-fourths of the wild horse and burros. And then within a few years, there are catastrophic fires in these same areas that sweep hundreds of thousands, in some cases, hundreds of thousands of acres. And really intense fires too that really sterilize the soils. So, the global climate change is something to really heed, and to just try to scapegoat horses as being somehow exacerbating to the global warming or the global climate change, I think is outrageous. It did not. I mean, I wrote an article about that. I did a little study for Love Wild Horses that was published. So I'd be glad to share that. And I sourced it. I sourced it with the scientific proofs. So I just think it would be a terrible mistake, and I would hope that we can get the higher ups to recognize these precious qualities of naturally living horses that in so many ways justify their continued presence.
So another question I have for you is in this, they talked about small mammal populations and that prairie dog towns and other small mammal communities would be vulnerable to the impacts of their to impacts from the horses. So do you have anything to say about that? Like how horses coexist with prairie dogs and other small
Yeah,
mammals?
well, the prairie dogs are like a keystone species, on the prairies and the plains, and they help maintain the grasslands. Uh, if the horses are building deeper soils and preventing shrub takeover or shrub tree takeover, then they are keeping these open areas which the prairie dogs live in, and the deeper soils would benefit. Deeper, moister soils would benefit the prairie dogs. And the prairie dogs with their little tunnels and whatnot, they aerate the soils. So I see it as a great complementarity, a mutualism between the horse and the prairie dog. But I will repeat, people have to learn patience. A good ecologist who really is honest in his desire to know the truth about living life communities, he has to have a lot of patience. He can't make quick, knee-jerk, oversimplified statements. And that's what I see a lot in this National Park Service environmental assessment. And I've given 2 inputs already to that, which I think I sent you or something.
Yes, thank you. The other thing I want to ask you is, this is something that they talk about, and what you say about the prairie dogs is 100% true. Even we see there are bands of horses that exist. Their territory is near big prairie dog towns in the park. And we've never, there's no decrease in prairie dogs. Anyone who lives out here will tell you that. If anything, the prairie dog population is increasing crazy. But we see the horses coexist with the prairie dogs. So I just wanted to get your input on
Oh,
that.
oh, great. How about the black-footed ferret? Are there any of those, the natural predators of the prairie dogs?
No, but the whispers that we're hearing is that the park wants to reintroduce the black-footed ferret, and that's why they've let the prairie dog population get what seems to be out of
Yeah.
control by the public.
Yeah, the ranching industry targeted the both of those, especially the prairie dogs, and consequently the black-footed ferrets almost went extinct. They were on the
Right.
critically endangered, almost wiped out. So that's another consideration. But to say that the horses are are detrimental to the prairie dogs, that me as an ecologist who've studied the prairie ecosystems and plains ecosystems, I see that as being a concocted uh, stand. Stand.
What about if they are interested in reintroducing the black-footed ferret? What is the relationship between black-footed ferret and horses then? Is that also something that, because that's something that we haven't experienced. So is that something that complements each other also?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if they're complementing the prairie dog by building deeper, more humus-rich soils, which the prairie dogs aerate, and then the prairie dogs are the main prey animal of the black-footed ferret, and it's just logical that the horses would be benefiting them. And remember too, the the droppings of the horse, a lot of times they're put down in what ecologists call dung depots, or commonly called stud piles. Those are very valuable in ecosystems, and they benefit countless insects, dung beetles, even small little rodents and lizards and birds that come. And like in times of extreme winters, or when there's dearth of vegetation for forage, they can go and reprocess. The horses can, and other animals can, because they still have, as I repeat, those intact organic molecules that haven't been, like the ruminants, like really sapped a lot with their multiple stomachs and their rumen fermenting organ. Their droppings have hardly any uh, nutritive value. They're stripped of the nutrients. So that alone, as a basic observation, could be really major. And to blatantly ignore that, I think is outrageous. Outrageous.
And then another thing that they mentioned in here is that horses, I think they actually said that horses would um not only compete with other wildlife for water sources, but that horses would move some of the larger ungulates like the elk and the bison from waterways. Have you ever experienced anything like that happening? Because it sounds pretty ridiculous.
Well, the horses don't linger unless they're really forced into it by an extreme situation. Their nature is to come into the water source, tank up, maybe spend half an hour, and then go off in a very orderly manner. And they develop a hierarchy among the bands, and they let one band go, and then when it leaves, and the other band comes in according to their hierarchy they set up. On the contrary, the cattle will come in and just camp on a riparian habitat, and just mash it all up and then defecate in it. So yeah, they say there have been incidents where they've observed the horses to chase off antelope, or pronghorn or elk or something. But I think these are relatively minor effects that happen once in a while, but not usually. And I believe that these people, these officials that work for these agencies, they have their agenda. And as I learned, having worked for some of these agencies, like the BLM, it's sort of implied that you will target the wild horses and burros. So I worked on streamside inventory, and that's one thing that really upset me, was how they targeted the wild horse and burros and ignored the main uh, detrimental factors that were impinging upon the desert streams here in Nevada, and springs and lakeside, such as particularly the livestock, cattle, sheep, and also especially off-highway vehicles, people that go off the main public roads and often just go totally off any road, and they do enormous destruction. But that's a very loud and vocal and wealthy uh, component of our society. And when you try to say, no, 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 we don't want you just going out there recklessly trampling over, then they go to Congress. They say they're impinging on our freedom to be free and go out and wherever we want to go. And it's really very childish. So yeah, I learned a lot about that targeting. And I think what's happened to too many of these agencies is they've got into a rut, and they get together in their meetings, and then they go in the evening, they have their big meals, and then they go into their bars, and they just kind of get down into a real base level of values, of valuing the land, where they just favor the old traditional and don't question. And that's really got to be confronted and changed, because it's not just a unimportant matter. It's an extremely important matter today. And it's our natural ecosystems and their restoration that can restore life and really save life on Earth from these terrible threats like the global heating, I call it, because it's not just warming, it's heating up very rapidly, and everyone should be really up and alarmed about this and doing whatever they can in their personal and their social social context.
So let me ask you this. Another thing that they talked about in this environmental assessment is the need to honor the secretarial order that has to do with the bison movement. So the bison initiative to reintroduce bison. And I think that everyone can appreciate, right? We push bison to the brink of extinction also. But
Right.
so don't you feel though that number one, we never seem to learn from our past, right? So now we're going to bring the bison back, but at the expense of exterminating horses? Doesn't
Oh
seem
yeah,
like
yeah,
that's the path that we're going down.
yeah. That is just so alarming. And both the bison and the buffalo, as the Native Americans called them, and the naturally living horses uh, were targeted, and the herds that were kind of semi-wild that were used by the Native American tribes, they were both targeted for elimination in order to destroy Native American lifestyle and take over their land. And remember, there was those treaties, the Fort Laramie Treaty, which granted vast areas for the Native Americans, like the Blackfoot and the Lakota, to continue the traditional way of life. And then they were aimlessly broken, the proverbial broken treaty. Well, I really see the Wild Free Roaming Horse and Burros Act as being a broken treaty, and against the horse who has done so much for mankind, and the burro too. And then we had this beautiful idea of giving them some relatively minor portion of the public lands where they can be natural and free, and then to just turn around and ignore the true spirit and intent of this act. I think it's really outrageous. And I tell you, if we could reverse this, we really would make America great again. And we might save America and save life in the process. So that's what I have to say for that. So we're really talking here, Chris, about a moral issue, about a basic value,
Right.
the question of our values as a society and as individuals, and looking at the whole truth and not being biased or prejudiced, and being fair-minded. That's what we're talking about.
So I have a question for you because and I don't think that we talk about this enough. I know we like to pick your brain for your ecological benefits, but do you want to talk a little bit about what it was like working with Wild Horse Annie and the movement? And what do you see that happened then that we need to do now? Like, what is Wild Horse advocacy missing now? It seems incredible. And I know I've talked to Heather from Save Our Wild Horses about this a lot. I mean, Wild Horse Annie seemed like she moved mountains without
Yeah,
internet, right? So now we have the internet and we should be able to reach millions of people so easily
yeah.
and get them to call to action. And it's so hard to get people to actually act. So how did you guys go about that? And I know a lot of it had to do with children, and I know there's a lot of movements with
Yeah,
children.
but there were many adults too, it was unanimously passed. So it wasn't just the children. And the children were very important, obviously, but it was so many adults as well that were really for this. They saw it as a breath of fresh air. Well, what I really admired about Velma Johnston was her integrity and her fortitude and her affability with people, and she commanded respect. She really did. And she was a little diminutive, wiry little lady who had suffered a lot because she had contracted polio when she was a child, and they had taken her out of her cast when she was 12, but they took her out prematurely, and they somehow twisted her frame, her head, and her one eye was a couple inches lower than the other, and so she had a lot to overcome. This lady, she had suffered. She'd really been through the ringer, so to speak. So she had amazing fortitude, but she had great compassion for the horses, and she had a great sense of honoring the greater truth, and justice about them. So there was sort of an aura about Wild Horse Annie that commanded people's respect. And he didn't just, kiss up people or lick their boots or, to gain favor. No, he had integrity. So I think that's what's needed today. And at the same time, she was, she tried to be respectful. But when she saw people acting like, you know, mean-spirited jerks, she called a spade a spade. She didn't hesitate to do that. So a lot of it was just moral courage. She had a lot of moral courage. But remember, too, there were a lot less people back then, and a lot less competing interests than there are today. So it's a much less complicated society. You could sit down with people that seemed to be on the opposite side of the fence, but still have respectful conversation. It wasn't so polarized as
Right.
it has become at present.
Okay. Um, if anyone has any questions for Craig, put them in the chat. I do know Deborah has asked if you would be able to provide your PowerPoints to their New Jersey Wild Horse and Burros advocate group. They on Facebook, they have a private and a public page.
Yeah, I might be able to help there. Of course, I've had the problem of people stealing my pictures and then crediting themselves as having taken these pictures. So I am leery of that, having experienced that disrespectful treatment. But I think we could work something out. Just get in touch with me, and yeah, you can go on to my website, wildhorseconspiracy.org, and you can get a lot of pictures right there and a lot of commentaries that talk about these space different points. But yeah, I'd be glad to help you.
Do you, is your contact information on the website, or I can have them email
Oh,
me and I
oh,
can,
oh, yeah, yeah. You can go to my email, which is ccdowner@aol.com, and you can go to my cell for a text or um and I'd be glad to help you. I'm really glad that you want to do this. It's a great idea. Remember, all the public lands and the wild horses, they're everyone's concern. And millions of people from the east come out and enjoy seeing them, and even from all over the world, they come to see the wild horse and burros. So take an interest. I'm so glad you're taking an interest. That's wonderful.
do you have any other closing thoughts for us, Craig, or anything else? Any other advice you have for us, either in this specific fight for the Theodore Roosevelt horses or just wild horse advocacy in general? Because I really think that we need to pick your brain more about your time with
Yeah,
Wild Horse
yeah.
Annie.
At the end of that last article that I wrote, here I can show it. I'm printed it out. I wrote a much larger article, but this is what the article looks like. It's in the Horse Talk, New
Hmm.
Zealand, and it was
Right.
based on October 21st. But at the end, I have this to say, which I think would be one of the most very effective things to do, is one immediate practical step would be to support and pass voluntary grazing permit retirement act legislation that would allow many of America's targeted wild equid herds to be restored to genetically viable population. And this was introduced as H.R. 6935 in the 117th Congress by uh, let's see, it was referred to the Subcommittee on National Parks, Forests, and Public Lands. And I think that bill, I was told by, was it Eric Mulvar said it has been reintroduced. So I think that would be a great one because I believe many of these public lands ranchers would go for fair market value. It's not required by law. Um, our government agencies have the right to retire them for any reason, including maintain thriving wild horse and burros. That's in the Code of Federal Regulation 47 10.5 and 0.6. Curtailment or total retirement of the public lands grazing. But there are many who would go for this fair market value buyout. And then in so many of the herd areas, you would free up habitat so that we could employ proper landscape management and reserve design and rewilding principles. So you would have naturally self-stabilizing, but genetically viable, substantive herd numbers, and would be allowed to harmoniously integrate with the public lands ecosystem. Um, that's what I would recommend, and there's other acts too, like there that are still viable to try and stop the roundups, and that Dina Titus introduced, and also there's the Safe Act too to support that to stop terrible transport, slaughter, and let's really stand up for these wonderful animals, and they deserve a adequate, viable, natural place or habitat on our public lands or wherever people have the will to share land and freedom with them. I'm sure they'll be blessed if they do.
Can you send me an email with either your articles or links to your articles? People are asking where they can get that from, and I can share it out with all of
Oh,
our followers.
oh, yeah, yeah. I'll be glad to send you some of the key articles I've published recently.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate your time, Craig. And let me know when you're coming out this way. I'll be happy to take you out to see the horses. So
Oh, yeah, well, I definitely want to do that, so, don't be surprised if you hear from me.
I won't be. And everybody's saying thank you. It was very informative. And I really, really appreciate your time and for you helping and fighting with us to save these horses.
Yeah, good luck. Well, we can do it. We just have to believe, positivity breeds positivity, so we can
We're,
win.
we're
You know,
trying.
yeah, all right,
Thank you so much.
you
Thank you,
bet.
everybody. Have a good night.
Good night.